August 25, 1942, the Scottish Highlands. A Sunderland flying boat carrying a prince turns slowly off course, descends below the cloud line, and flies directly into a hillside at an altitude it should never have been flying. 14 men die. One survives, and he will never speak about what he saw. The flight plan disappears. The court of inquiry files vanish. The man some believe was at the controls when the plane went down was not the pilot. The palace does not explain. The government does not investigate beyond a single closed session. And the name of the prince who died that day is quietly allowed to slip from the front pages of a nation consumed by war into the footnotes of a history that was never meant to examine him too closely. Prince George, Duke of Kent, was the fourth son of King George V and Queen Mary. He was born in 1902 at York Cottage on the Sandringham estate, the last of the royal children to be born in the Edwardian rather than the Victorian age, a distinction that suited him. In a family defined by rigidity, duty, and a particular brand of Hanoverian coldness, George was the exception. He was, by nearly every account from those who knew the family intimately, the most intelligent, the most charming, the most cultivated of his generation. He played the piano with genuine skill. He spoke French and Italian fluently. He understood interior decoration with the eye of a professional. He wore double-breasted suits from Anderson and Shepherd with a precision that made him, alongside his older brother Edward, the best-dressed man in the royal family, which is to say, for a time, one of the best-dressed men in the world. But George was also something his family understood less easily and managed less successfully. He was restless. He was curious in directions that the palace considered dangerous. He was drawn to the artistic, the theatrical, the unconventional, and to people who existed well outside the boundaries of what the monarchy considered acceptable company. He was, in the language of his era, a problem, and the problem would grow, over 2 decades, into something the establishment could no longer simply manage through discretion and distance. It would require something more permanent. This is the story of what the palace needed buried, what the government agreed to seal, and why the crash that killed Prince George has never been fully explained. 80 years after a plane flew into a hillside in Caithness and took with it whatever truth the British royal family had been trying for 20 years to keep from reaching the light. The royal children of George V and Queen Mary were raised in an atmosphere of austere formality that has been well documented and rarely matched in its emotional austerity. The king was a man who believed that affection was a form of weakness, that discipline was the highest expression of love, and that tears, particularly in boys, were an indication of moral failure. Queen Mary, by the accounts of those who knew the household, loved her children in the way a curator loves a collection, with admiration from a distance, and always with an eye toward how each piece would appear to the public. In this household, George distinguished himself not by rebellion, that was his older brother Edward's role, but by sheer intellectual force. He was the brightest of the 5 siblings, the one who absorbed languages effortlessly, who could discuss art with genuine understanding, who played the piano not as a social accomplishment, but because he genuinely loved music. His family recognized his intelligence and, in the tradition of royal families everywhere, responded to it by sending him somewhere it could do no damage. At 13, he was dispatched to Naval College, first at Osborne, then at Dartmouth, the same path taken by his older brothers. He hated it. He suffered from acute seasickness that never abated across his entire naval career. He remained in the Royal Navy for nearly a decade, serving on HMS Iron Duke and later on the flagship HMS Nelson, rising through the ranks with the automatic promotions that came with royal blood, performing the duties of an officer with competence if not passion, and spending every available moment of shore leave in the company of people his father would have preferred he never meet. It was during these years that George began to construct the parallel life that would define him. A life lived partly in the rigid, public world of naval duty and royal obligation, and partly in the vivid, ungoverned world of London nightlife, artistic circles, and a social set that moved through the clubs and apartments of Mayfair with a casual indifference to convention that would have been unthinkable inside the walls of Buckingham Palace. In the mid-1920s, George met a woman who would alter the trajectory of his life in ways that neither the palace nor the intelligence services would ever fully manage. Her name was Kiki Preston. She was born Alice Gwynn, a cousin of the heiress Gloria Vanderbilt, and she carried with her a fortune, a social connections map that spanned 2 continents, and a heroin addiction so defining that she was known in certain circles of London and Paris as the girl with the silver syringe. The relationship between George and Preston was not, by any surviving account, a conventional romance. It was something more entangled and more destructive. There were rumors of a ménage à trois involving Jorge Uriburu, the bisexual son of the Argentine ambassador to the court of St. James. There were rumors of a child, a son, allegedly fathered by George and placed for adoption with the American publisher Cass Canfield. The boy, Michael Temple Canfield, would grow up to marry Lee Radziwill, the sister of Jacqueline Kennedy. The royal family never acknowledged him. The rumors never entirely died. What is documented, what surfaced in the accounts of those who moved close enough to the royal household to observe its private operations, is that George developed during this period a dependence on morphine and cocaine. The addiction was severe enough that his older brother Edward, the Prince of Wales, was reportedly tasked with intervening, personally escorting George through a withdrawal process that was conducted not in a hospital but in private rooms, away from the press, away from the official record, handled the way the royal family handled everything that threatened its public image, quietly, and with the understanding that the first priority was not the health of the man, but the reputation of the crown. Kiki Preston would outlive George by 4 years. In 1946, she jumped from a window of the Stanhope Hotel in New York City. She carried with her whatever she knew. The palace did not comment. The newspapers reported it as the tragic end of a fading socialite. No one in the British press connected her death publicly to the royal family she had known intimately. Because by then, the story of Prince George and Kiki Preston was already a story the establishment had decided would remain untold. Among the most persistent and most carefully unexamined aspects of George's life were his relationships with men. The most significant of these, by duration and by the volume of rumor it generated, was his alleged 19-year relationship with the playwright and composer Niall Coward. Coward was, in the interwar years, one of the most famous and most talented men in British cultural life. He was also, in a society that criminalized homosexuality, a man who lived his private life under constant threat of exposure, arrest, and professional destruction. The British security services, according to files that have surfaced in fragments over the decades, were aware of the relationship. There is a report, never officially confirmed but never officially denied, that Coward and George were once stopped by the Metropolitan Police on the streets of London, both in women's clothing, on suspicion of prostitution. The incident, if it occurred, was handled with the quiet efficiency that the establishment reserved for problems involving the royal family. No charges were filed. No record appeared in the press. But the more dangerous problem was not the encounters themselves. It was the evidence they left behind. Love letters, written in George's hand, addressed to Coward, existed. And at least one set of these letters was stolen from Coward's residence. Another set, according to multiple accounts, fell into the possession of a male prostitute in Paris who recognized their value and set about extracting payment for their return. The blackmail was not handled through courts or police. It was handled the way the royal family had always handled such matters, through intermediaries, through quiet payments, through the deployment of money to purchase silence, and through the understanding that the cost of silence, however high, was always lower than the cost of exposure. These were not isolated incidents, they were a pattern. A prince who lived with a recklessness that generated material capable of destroying not merely his own reputation, but the standing of the monarchy itself. In an era when the monarchy could not afford another scandal. George's older brother Edward had already abdicated the throne in 1936 to marry Wallis Simpson. The institution was, by the late 1930s, operating under a level of public scrutiny and institutional fragility that left no room for a second crisis. And yet George, through sheer force of personality and an apparent inability to govern his own private impulses, continued to generate exactly the kind of crises the palace had no mechanism left to absorb. In 1934, the palace executed what appeared to be a decisive solution. George was married to Princess Marina of Greece and Denmark, a woman of genuine beauty, impeccable royal lineage, and sufficient public charm to redirect the narrative away from the private life the establishment had been managing for a decade. The wedding at Westminster Abbey was attended by 2,000 guests. A Greek Orthodox ceremony followed at Buckingham Palace. The couple was created Duke and Duchess of Kent, and they moved into a townhouse at Belgrave Square that George personally designed with the same exacting taste he brought to everything visible and public. For a time, the strategy worked. The Duke and Duchess of Kent became, in the society pages and the newsreels, the most glamorous couple in the royal family. They entertained lavishly. They gathered around them the most brilliant names in British arts and society. They were, for a brief, glittering moment, exactly what the monarchy needed: a modern, sophisticated, photogenic embodiment of royal relevance, in a decade when the relevance of the crown was being openly questioned for the first time in modern memory. But the private life did not cease. The affairs, both male and female, continued behind the carefully maintained facade of public marriage. Among those linked to George during this period were the musical star Jessie Matthews, the banking heiress Poppy Baring, the socialite Margaret Wyam, who would later become the scandalous Duchess of Argyll, and according to some accounts, the romantic novelist Barbara Cartland, who claimed that George was the father of her daughter Reine, who would one day become Princess Diana's stepmother. None of these relationships were confirmed by the palace. None were entirely denied. They existed in the space between, the space the royal family had cultivated for centuries, where rumor was preferable to confirmation because rumor could be managed and confirmation could not. The marriage had given the palace what it needed most: a public story to tell. It had not, however, given them what they needed most, which was control over the private story that continued to unfold beneath it. George was, by every account, genuinely fond of Marina. He was also, by every account, incapable of the sustained self-discipline that the role of respectable royal husband required. The gap between who he was in public and who he was in private was not narrowing, it was widening. And with each year, the material that could close the gap in the wrong direction, the letters, the witnesses, the photographs, the acquaintances who knew too much, was accumulating. When war came in September 1939, it solved certain problems for the palace and created others. George returned to active service, initially with the Royal Navy in the Intelligence Division of the Admiralty, then transferring to the Royal Air Force in 1940. The war gave him a role, a uniform, a purpose that the peacetime establishment had never quite been able to provide. It also placed him inside the machinery of state secrecy, where his clearance level and his family name gave him access to information that, in the wrong hands or in his hands, carried risks that certain figures within the intelligence community were not willing to accept indefinitely. There is a dimension to George's wartime role that has never been fully explained, and it connects to one of the most bizarre episodes of the entire war. In May 1941, Rudolf Hess, deputy Führer of Nazi Germany, flew solo to Scotland, supposedly on a private peace mission. Hess believed, or had been led to believe, that there existed within the British establishment a faction sympathetic to negotiated peace with Germany, and that Prince George, Duke of Kent, was a figure of significance within that faction. Whether George held any such sympathies, whether he was aware of Hess's beliefs, whether the entire Hess episode was a British intelligence operation designed to embarrass the Nazi regime, or a genuine diplomatic overture that went catastrophically wrong, remains a matter of historical dispute that the sealed files, wherever they are, have prevented from being resolved. What is known is that George's wartime duties were broader than the publicly stated role of staff officer at RAF Training Command. His time in the intelligence division, his access to classified material, his family connections across European royalty, many of whom had navigated the war with varying degrees of collaboration and resistance, all placed him in a position that was simultaneously useful and dangerous. A prince with access to state secrets and a private life that had already generated enough blackmail material to fill a filing cabinet was, in the calculus of wartime security, an asset that could at any moment become a liability. The question of when that shift occurred, if it occurred, and who made the determination, sits at the center of everything that followed. On the afternoon of August 25, 1942, a short Sunderland Mark III flying boat took off from Invergordon, a naval base on the eastern coast of Scotland. Its stated destination was Iceland, where the Duke of Kent was to conduct a morale visit to RAF personnel stationed there. 15 men were on board. The crew was experienced. The aircraft was in good condition. The weather was poor but not exceptional for the region. The aircraft should have flown northwest over the sea toward Iceland. Instead, it turned east, flew inland, descended below the cloud cover, and at approximately 1:30 in the afternoon, struck the side of a hill called Eagle's Rock near the village of Dunbeath, in Caithness, one of the most remote and sparsely populated regions in Britain. The impact was catastrophic. 14 of the 15 men on board were killed instantly. Idris, the sole survivor, was the rear gunner, Flight Sergeant Andrew Jack, who was pulled from the wreckage with injuries but alive. He would live for decades more. He would never speak publicly about what he remembered of the flight. The official investigation, conducted as a secret court of inquiry rather than a public coroner's inquest, attributed the crash to pilot error. The lead pilot, Flight Lieutenant Frank Goyen, an experienced aviator with thousands of flying hours, was blamed posthumously for flying off course and descending below a safe altitude. The matter was closed. It was wartime. The aircraft crashed. Men died. The public was not, in the atmosphere of 1942, inclined to question the official account of a military accident involving a member of the royal family. But the details that surfaced, slowly, over the following decades, did not align with the simplicity of the official account. The flight plan that Goyen filed before takeoff, the document that would have established the intended route, altitude, and waypoints, disappeared. The records of the court of inquiry were sealed and have never been released. The aircraft was carrying, by some accounts, more crew than the mission required, including personnel whose presence on a morale-boosting flight to Iceland has never been satisfactorily explained. And there were persistent claims, never proven but never extinguished, that the person at the controls when the aircraft struck the hillside was not Frank Goyen, but Prince George himself, who held an RAF pilot's license and was known to take the controls of aircraft he was traveling in, a habit that his superiors had reportedly asked him to discontinue. A normal flight from Invergordon to Iceland would have remained over water for the entirety of its route. The crash site was inland, on a heading that pointed not toward Iceland but toward the east, toward the North Sea, toward Scandinavia. Some researchers have suggested the aircraft was on a secret mission to Sweden, carrying the Duke to unauthorized peace negotiations with representatives of the German resistance. Others have proposed that British intelligence, acting on orders from the highest level of government, arranged the crash to eliminate a prince whose private life and whose access to classified information had made him an unacceptable security risk. Neither theory has been confirmed, neither has been disproven. The files that might resolve the question remain 80 years later sealed. Prince George was buried in the Royal Burial Ground at Frogmore, within the grounds of Windsor Castle. He was 39 years old, the first member of the British royal family to die on active military service in over 4 centuries. The funeral was conducted with the appropriate ceremony. The press coverage was respectful, brief, and contained within the parameters of wartime reporting, which is to say, it reported the fact of the death and the official explanation. And it did not pursue the questions that the official explanation did not answer. In the years that followed, the story of Prince George was handled by the palace and by the press with a particular kind of institutional silence that the British establishment has perfected over centuries. It was not denied because denial would draw attention. It was not investigated because investigation would imply there was something to find. It was simply allowed to settle, the way sediment settles at the bottom of a river, becoming part of the landscape over time until the shape of the riverbed itself is defined by what has been deposited there. The letters that had been bought back from blackmailers were destroyed, or placed in archives that remain closed, or simply lost in the chaos of a war that provided convenient cover for the disappearance of inconvenient documents. Idris, the witnesses who had known George's private life, the lovers, the friends, the staff, were dealt with through a combination of loyalty, financial incentive, and the natural attrition of a war that killed millions and made the private scandals of one prince seem, by comparison, trivial. Kiki Preston was dead. Niall Coward, who survived the war, would never speak publicly about the relationship, and the letters that had been stolen from his home were never recovered, or at least never acknowledged to have been recovered. What the palace needed buried was not simply a man. It was the entire apparatus of a private life that had, over 2 decades, generated enough material to destabilize the monarchy at a moment when the monarchy could not absorb any further destabilization. The abdication of Edward VIII had already brought the institution to the edge of an existential crisis. A second prince, exposed as a drug addict, a bisexual adulterer, a target of international blackmail, and a potential security compromise during a war for national survival, would have been more than a scandal. It would have been a structural failure of the crown itself. The crash, whatever its cause, solved that problem permanently. There is a particular kind of silence that institutions maintain not because they have nothing to say, but because they have calculated, with the cold precision of an actuary. That silence is cheaper than truth. The British royal family has practiced this silence for centuries. It is not, in its operation, conspiratorial in the dramatic sense. It is something more banal and more effective. It is the accumulated habit of an institution that has learned, through long experience, that the most efficient way to handle a problem is to wait for it to become history, and then to allow history to handle it with the same indifference that time applies to everything it touches. Prince George, Duke of Kent, was a man who lived more vividly and more dangerously than his position permitted. He was intelligent, charming, artistic, and fundamentally ungovernable. The same qualities that made him the most interesting member of his family made him the most dangerous to the institution his family represented. The palace could manage his affairs. It could buy back his letters. It could arrange his marriage. It could redirect his public image. What it could not do was make him into the kind of man the monarchy required: steady, predictable, disciplined, and above all, controllable. Some deaths close a story. His opened one, the palace has been trying to close ever since. The sealed files, the missing flight plan, the survivor who never spoke, the contradictions in the official account, these are not the artifacts of a mystery that defies solution. They are the artifacts of a solution that defies examination. The most likely explanation for the crash remains, as it has always been, a tragic accident in poor weather involving an experienced crew flying an aircraft that should not have been where it was. But the institutional response to that accident, the sealed inquiry, the vanished documents, the absence of the transparency that would normally accompany the death of a senior member of the royal family on active service, reveals something more troubling than any conspiracy theory. It reveals an institution that had learned, long before August 1942, that certain problems are easier to bury than to solve, and that when a solution presents itself, whether by accident or by design, the most rational response is not to investigate it too thoroughly, because the investigation itself might reveal what the institution most needs to keep hidden. Prince George was buried at Frogmore, beside the castle that has housed his family for nearly 1,000 years. The hillside where he died remains unmarked. The files remain sealed. And the silence that has surrounded his death for 8 decades is not the silence of an unsolved mystery. It is the silence of an institution that got exactly what it needed and has spent every year since making certain no one looks too closely at how.